Hey, listener. Ready for a deep dive into something truly creepy? We're cracking open the Lords of Madness today, specifically those excerpts you sent about D&D's aberrations.
Good choices, because aberrations, they really aren't your typical baddies.
No kidding. Even for someone like me who thought they'd seen it all, these creatures are something else. It's like they're designed to unsettle on a fundamental level.
It's that wrongness that gets under your skin,
Hmm.
right? They're not just evil, they're fundamentally wrong. A violation of the natural order, the kind of thing that makes even the toughest paladin reach for the holy water.
Speaking of different perspectives, you mentioned wanting to explore those. And it's true, even druids, who usually don't bat an eye at things most folks consider evil, aberrations, even they get creeped out. It's like their existence is just wrong.
Right. Absolutely. And you see that reflected in their origins, too. Take mind flayers, for example.
The brain eaters, right. I've always found them disturbing, but never really thought about why.
Well, it's more than just their taste for brains. These guys are invaders, intruders from a place called the Far Realm, and trust me, it earns that name. Imagine a dimension so alien, so fundamentally wrong, that it makes the darkest corners of our world look like a sunny meadow. Reality itself warps and twists in the Far Realm.
Okay, getting some serious Lovecraftian vibes here. I can see why anything coming from a place like that would be inherently disturbing.
And it's not just mind flayers. You've got beholders. Those things. They're not born in some dark forest or a subterranean lair. Beholders, they crawl out of the dreams of mad gods. Deities so far gone, so utterly beyond our comprehension, that their very thoughts give rise to these floating nightmares.
No, that's just messed up. We're talking about creatures born from madness itself.
And those nightmares are terrifyingly well equipped. I mean, you sent me some excerpts about beholders and the air eye rays, right? 10 of them, each shooting out a different magical effect.
Oh, yeah, the books mention that. Talk about overkill. Just one of those things would be bad enough, but 10.
Right. But here's the thing. As freaky as those eye rays are, they're just the tip of the iceberg.
Yeah.
The real power of a beholder lies in its mind, in its xenophobia.
It's xenophobia. So they're not just powerful, they're also terrified of everything.
To an insane degree. See, a beholder's paranoia, it's so deeply ingrained that it sees literally everything and everyone as a threat. Their minds are twisted, warped by their origins in that chaotic far realm. And that fear, it drives them to control or just completely obliterate anything that isn't them.
And they're not exactly known for their family-friendly values either, right?
You're talking about that detail from the Lords of Madness, right? Where a beholder mother chooses which of her young to devour based on how closely they resemble her.
Yeah, that one. It's like survival of the most narcissistic offspring. I mean, talk about terrifying parenting.
And that's exactly the point. It's not just about power or magical abilities. It's this deep-seated, all-consuming terror that defines a beholder's nature. They're a perfect example of how the aberrant takes psychological horror to a whole new level.
Makes you wonder if those family reunions involve therapy sessions. But speaking of messed up family dynamics, let's move on to another control freak of the aberrant world. The Neogi.
Ah, yes, the Neogi, masters of enslavement. But unlike beholders who prefer a more direct approach than the Neogi, they're all about insidious control.
Right. It's not about blasting you with eye lasers. It's about whispering threats and pulling strings from the shadows.
Precisely. The Neogi build their empires on the backs of their captives, using manipulation and cunning to orchestrate every aspect of their slaves' lives.
And here I thought micromanaging was bad in the office. But it's interesting, though, even with those wildly different methods, both beholders and Neogi seem driven by this same core emotion, paranoia.
Absolutely. It's not just about physical domination, you see. It's the psychological manipulation.
That's
The excerpt you sent, it mentioned these great old masters,
Those are,
essentially enslaved Neogi, but they've been, transformed,
yeah.
turned into living nurseries, forced to birth and nurture the next generation of slavers.
Okay, now that is just disturbing and seriously thought-provoking, especially for someone like me who's fascinated by psychology.
Right? It adds this whole other layer to their monstrosity.
Yeah.
Because think about it. They enslave others because they're terrified of being enslaved themselves.
So they become the very thing they fear most.
Yeah.
There's a dark irony there, for sure.
There is. But, you mentioned wanting to deep dive on aboleths, and I have to say, they're a fascinating example of how wrongness can manifest in a creature.
Oh, absolutely. The book even calls them nightmares out of time. I mean, that's not exactly a growing endorsement.
And for good reason.
Yeah.
What makes aboleths so compelling, so utterly other, is that they're more than just fishy creatures. Their wrongness, it's woven into their very biology.
You mean like their weird anatomy?
Exactly. The excerpts you sent, they go into some pretty bizarre detail about their internal organs. Specifically, they mention these two organs, the millithast and the nilthast.
Those names already sound like something out of a Lovecraftian fever dream. What in the world do those things do?
Well, the millithast, it secretes this strange mucus, allows them to move through water with, like, impossible grace and speed.
Wait, so they're like swimming nightmares fueled by alien snot.
Pretty much. But as fascinating as their physiology is, it's their minds where things get really unsettling.
Oh, yeah, their minds. The book mentioned something about that, right? Comparing them to something.
A supernova.
A supernova, and
Yeah.
human minds are like,
Oh, flickering candles. It's a difference in scale and intensity that's almost impossible to grasp. And then there are the stories they tell, the memories they claim to possess.
oh, right, they claim to be older than the gods themselves, right, to have witnessed entire worlds live and die.
Exactly. Now, whether those are true memories or just delusions, it's hard to say. But one thing's for sure, aboleths are ancient. Their knowledge, real or imagined, it stretches back to epochs we can barely comprehend.
So we're talking about creatures so old, they make the oldest redwoods look like seedlings. And the things they must have seen, it's both awe-inspiring and more than a little terrifying.
It is. The source material mentions how aboleths, they have this utter disdain for other races. We're talking about beings that see the entirety of civilization as little more than a brief flicker in a vast, unending darkness.
And to them, we're just fleeting, insignificant things, which, in the grand scheme of things, I guess we kind of are. But enough about our impending existential crisis. We were talking about the impact of aberrations on the normal world and those cults dedicated to them.
Ah, yes, the cults. That's where things get really interesting from a sociological perspective, wouldn't you say?
Definitely. I mean, I get being creeped out by aberrations, but to actually worship them, to see them as gods, that takes things to a whole other level.
It really makes you wonder what drives a person to embrace that kind of belief system, doesn't it? To
Yeah.
turn away from everything considered good and holy and pledge yourself to creatures that embody chaos and destruction.
It's like choosing to follow the things that go bump in the night instead of seeking out the light, right?
Yeah.
But even with these cults, even with these creatures finding ways to like worm their way into our world, there are ways to fight back, aren't there?
There are. And that's where things get really interesting from a magical perspective. The source material mentions something called psionic seals. They're sort of like anti-magic, but specifically designed to ward off mental attacks.
So if magic is like a sword, psionics is like the mind shield.
A good way to put it.
Yeah.
And the existence of these defenses, it really raises some fascinating questions about the relationship between magic and psionics, don't you think? Are they separate forces or just different expressions of the same underlying power?
Right. It's like, what even is magic anyway? Adding that to my list of existential questions to ponder. But before we move on from defenses, what about the cerulean sign? Didn't the book mention that as well?
It did. The cerulean sign, it's an ancient symbol, a representation of the natural world pushing back against the aberrant. The source material only hints at its true power, but it's clearly not something to be trifled with.
So it's like Middleditch's trump card, a way to fight back against the wrongness of these creatures.
Perhaps. Maybe there's a bigger battle going on behind the scenes, a secret war between the forces of nature and the unsettling wrongness of the aberrations.
Now, that would make for one heck of a campaign setting. But before we get too caught up in hypothetical campaigns, let's get back to some of those other intriguing aberrations you're curious about, like the Grell, those blind telepathic predators. Talk about a creature feature gone wrong.
Right. Blind, but with telepathy so powerful, it more than makes up for their lack of sight. It's like they evolved to exploit a completely different sense, which makes sense given their alien origins.
Absolutely. But what really struck me was the mention of Grell philosophers. I mean, we have philosophers. Are we saying these creatures have deep thoughts too?
It certainly challenges our preconceived notions of intelligence, doesn't it? We tend to define intelligence based on our own limited perspective. But what if the Grell, despite their monstrous appearance and predatory instincts, possess a form of awareness, even wisdom, that we can barely comprehend?
So we assume that because something looks and acts monstrous, it can't possibly possess any deeper understanding of the universe. But maybe we're the ones with the limited perspective. Okay, now I'm really starting to see why you find aberrations so fascinating.
They force us to confront the unknown, to question our assumptions about the nature of reality and the very meaning of intelligence. But let's move on to another creature that I know caught your eye. The Sachari. Those body-snatching parasites are truly the stuff of nightmares, especially for someone interested in psychology like you.
Oh, absolutely. Forget therapy. Imagine your mind suddenly being invaded by a parasitic intelligence. Your thoughts, your actions no longer your own. It's the ultimate violation.
The Sokari embodies that primal fear of losing control, of becoming a puppet to a force beyond comprehension. They make us confront the terrifying possibility that our minds, our most cherished possession, are not as secure as we like to believe.
It all ties back into that theme of control we've been talking about, doesn't it? We've got beholders with their brute force, Nyogi with their manipulation, and then the Sokari who take control in the most insidious way imaginable by completely hijacking your identity.
Exactly. And, while we're talking about insidious threats, let's not forget about the unsettling wrongness embodied by creatures like the gas borer. A sentient plant, if you can even call it that, designed to spread toxins and terror wherever it goes.
Right. It's like someone took all the things we find creepy and unsettling in the natural world, all the things that make us go nope, and crank them up to 11. We've got beholders, mind flayers, aboleths, these terrifying creatures from beyond the veil of reality. But it feels like these are just the tip of the iceberg, right?
That's the thing about the aberrant. They defy categorization. They exist outside the boundaries of our understanding of life itself.
Yeah.
They make us question the very fabric of reality, the line between sanity and madness.
It really makes you wonder what else is lurking out there just beyond our understanding.
Right.
We've only talked about a handful of these aberrations, but the way the book describes the far realm, those mad gods,
Oh, yeah.
it's like we've only glimpsed a few shadows from a much larger, much more terrifying world.
And that's what makes the aberrant so compelling, so endlessly fascinating. The creatures we talked about, the ones in your excerpts, they're just the ones that have broken through,
Yeah.
the ones we know about.
So far.
But what about the ones that haven't? What unimaginable horrors are lurking in the depths of the far realm, just waiting for their chance to seep into our world?
Okay, now I'm both captivated and a little terrified.
Yeah.
It's like staring into the abyss and realizing the abyss is staring back, right?
Right.
But it makes you question, like, why anyone would willingly seek these creatures out.
And yet, that's the dilemma, isn't it? At least for adventurers in a world where the aberrant exists.
Right.
It's knowledge versus safety, curiosity versus self-preservation. Do you confront the unknown, try to understand these creatures, hoping to protect the world from whatever might come through? Or do you just turn away and hope those unsettling truths stay buried, pray they never find you?
Those are some heavy questions for a Tuesday.
Mhm.
But I think that's what makes this deep dive so effective. We've gone way beyond just like cataloging monsters. We've explored their origins, their psychology, the sheer existential dread they inspire, and we've barely scratched the surface.
We've only got so much time, unfortunately.
Right. It makes you realize just how vast and unsettling the world of D&D can be.
It's a testament to the power of imagination, isn't it? The writers who came up with this stuff.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, we only touched on a fraction of what's in the Lords of Madness, and look at what we uncovered.
Right.
It's incredible.
So much to think about.
The unsettling nature of control, the fragility of the mind, heck, we even questioned the very fabric of reality.
All thanks to these creepy crawlies from beyond.
Exactly. See, aberrations may be creatures of nightmare, but they remind us that the world is a vast and wondrous place, filled with wonders and horrors we can't even begin to comprehend.
And sometimes the most unsettling truths, well, they're the ones we find reflected within ourselves, right?
Oh, absolutely. We see ourselves in the monstrous and the strange.
Yeah.
It's what makes them so compelling.
Well said. And on that note, listener, we're going to wrap up this deep dive into the unsettling world of D&D's aberrations. But don't worry, this isn't the end of our journey together. We'll be back soon to explore another corner of your curiosity, uncover more hidden depths and fascinating details from the topics that, well, spark your imagination.
Always happy to dive in.
Until then, happy gaming and
Sweet dream.
you got it.